morning, actually, in Johannesburg. And we start off the show speaking about political economy, more specifically looking into the BRICS and as they are expanding, which is quite interesting. So, for us to go deeper into the discussion, we're joined by a political economist, Professor Patrick Bond. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for your time.
Salam alaikum, Eunice. Great to be with you and the listeners and viewers.
Now, it's a pleasure for us to have you on the show with us. We like to start by understanding, obviously, in terms of the aspect of what is BRICS and why does it actually matter, specifically for us here in South Africa also.
Yes, it's very important because the news, especially as January gets underway, and the new members, actually so-called partners. And yesterday's news is that Indonesia, which is one of the largest, I think, fourth largest country in the world by population, the largest Muslim country, has joined not as a partner as expected, but as a full member, bringing the group to 10. The group began in 2007 in some meetings in Russia, and then by 2009 became a full club with four original members, South Africa added. So it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and in 2010, South Africa joined. Our first hosting was 2013 in Durban, and then 2018 and 2023 here in Johannesburg. And what we've seen is, unfortunately, a lot of rhetoric from the BRICS about changing aspects of the world economy, such as the outflow of funds or the degree to which the US dollar retains enormous power over the rest of the world, the so-called exorbitant privilege of printing dollars and therefore quantitative easing, as the BRICS began in the early 2010s by simply bailing out New York banks. And then Europe followed suit. So did Britain, so did Japan. So the West have had this power to produce more money just by the printing press. And most of the poorer countries haven't been able to do that as they've risked devaluation of the currency. And then this 2023 Sandton meeting led to the expansion with four new members, including Iran, the United Arab Emirates, who've traditionally been at loggerheads with each other, as well as Egypt and Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia was slated to join and did suggest that they would be part of the meetings, however, never formally took up membership. And last week it was announced in Russia that Saudi membership is so-called frozen. And in Russia, where they hosted the 2024 BRICS, 13 new partners were named, although only 9 of them have formally joined. And maybe the most important of these for our purposes would be 2 that the South African government authorized, Nigeria and Algeria. Now, those are oil-rich countries. However, they're not quite yet at the stage where they accept it. And Algeria has had some very insulting remarks about the way in which they were treated in trying to have a full application before they allege South Africa vetoed it in Sandton. And then the other 2 of enormous importance are Saudi Arabia, as I said, not being necessarily yet in the BRICS, but having a full membership invitation, and Turkey. And Turkey was invited, even though it's a member of NATO, the Western military alliance, and with their President Erdogan being very, very fluid in his alliances. And we've just seen that in the Syrian coup there, or let's say, sort of a revolution overthrow of Bashar al-Assad's regime. We're looking at a very complicated geopolitical map where countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and UAE have been very strong allies of the genocidaires in Israel as sub-imperial powers of the United States. And Iran, of course, the opposite. Turkey playing both sides. So it's a very complicated situation when it comes to the geopolitics of both the 2 main wars, that is the Israeli genocide and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And unfortunately, as I say, on the economic front, very little, Eunice, was done to de-dollarize, to get the BRICS out of this situation where they're losing vast amounts in the international financial monetary system. And countries like Iran and Russia have been sanctioned as a function of U.S. hostility and can't do dollar trades for most of their companies. They're locked out of the so-called SWIFT interbank payment system. It's a very unsatisfactory situation given that the BRICS have certainly a majority in terms of the world population, majority in terms of world greenhouse gas emissions, which should give them extra responsibilities for the climate catastrophe to pay climate debt and to stop the emissions. But of course, the world imperialist and now sub-imperialist system doesn't really have any mechanisms at the multilateral level to change these things, either Western domination or the BRICS assimilation into that system. And that's the problem. BRICS talk left, walk right. They say they're against Western imperialism. It looks like in many ways they're within it.
Hmm. No, that's quite interesting because in my mind, I'm also thinking in terms of we've been hearing a lot of speculations about how the BRICS was actually going to replace the dollar in terms of the global market and in terms of dealing with the different countries, especially as a South African economy, as we see in how we have been struggling in the recession. Anyhow, now in terms of the expansion, Professor, how do we see the expansion going forward? Are there any points where we can say this is actually of a good benefit for the whole economy of not only South Africa, but those new countries that are joining, especially like your Indonesia and other countries?
Yes, it's so confusing, the chaos, especially with countries like Algeria throwing their toys out of the cot, being very angry about not being invited to be a full member and not really
Hmm.
yet taking up the partner position. In Nigeria, obviously being squeezed from the West, and as was Saudi Arabia. So you can just imagine this sort of tug of war about what is a member. However, let's just say you are chosen to be a member and you're expecting lots of new trade benefits and financial benefits, investment benefits. I'm not so sure. And one example was exactly a year ago, a week and a year ago, Ethiopia defaulted on its foreign debt. Now, it was expecting to join the BRICS as a so called full member, one of, as I said, the original five plus the four new ones.
Hmm.
Argentina invited, rejected it because of a new right wing government. Saudi Arabia playing both sides. So Ethiopia joins, and yet because it defaulted, it wouldn't have membership in the BRICS New Development Bank. And this is one of the tragedies, as you say, Eunice, that we'd expected an alternative to the dollar, one in which we could have local currencies being the basis for lending for development. After all, most development projects really do require domestic currency for local labor and mostly, with some exceptions, mostly local materials, especially for the basic needs for the roads and bridges and the houses and water systems and electricity systems. Most of the BRICS countries can actually finance those with their own currency. But the BRICS New Development Bank lends today 77% of its funds in dollars or in euros or British pounds. In other words, hard currencies of the West. So we didn't really see anything new and different from the BRICS NDP. And it's a shame that, for example, the chair of the BRICS NDP, Dondo Mohajani, who's had to resign under extreme allegations that he was part of the VBS corruption. He just resigned his role in the Moti Group a couple of months ago. He was the chair. Tito Mboweni played a big role when he was the both Reserve Bank governor and then especially as finance minister in basically making South Africa look to the West. And another guilty person, I'd say, to explain this is Lesejo Kganyago, our current Reserve Bank governor, and the main leader of the biggest bank, Sim Chabalala. And in 2023, a year and a half ago, when we hosted the BRICS in Sandton, they made it very clear that, especially those three, Mboweni, Golongwana, and Kganyago, and also Sim Chabalala of Standard, that because of the Johannesburg elites and financial districts' westward gaze, in other words, it's much, much more active role in the New York Stock Exchange and raising money from London and New York, we would not try to be part of any de-dollarization. And that's a shame to me because, as I said, there is a terrible outflow of capital associated with the strength of the dollar, the ability of the US Federal Reserve to put up interest rates very high. In 2022, Jerome Powell, the US Fed chair, did so. And we had many defaults in Africa, including BRICS member Egypt and other countries like Zambia had very high growth rates. So did Ghana. They both defaulted, as did Ethiopia. Now, these are the kinds of, let's say, punishments to poor countries that the US and its corporates and banks can wield because of the strength of the dollar. So I'd say as we go into the next BRICS, which will be July in Rio de Janeiro, we'd hope that forces, especially those here in South Africa, opposed to austerity, which is really all of us, since we're shrinking our government so much at 18% between 2020 and 2026 due to the IMF loan that Tito Mboweni took out then. And I'd say that we should have a coalition of forces that are saying to BRICS leaders, not just Lula, the host in Brazil, who is westward leaning when it comes to finance, not only our own financial elites, that we're really fed up with excess reliance upon the US dollar. Now, I happened to work in the US Federal Reserve when I was a student in the United States. I worked there 2 years, and I really saw firsthand how the US Fed serves US commercial banks. And that goes through quantitative easing, which is printing money, or having the power to raise the interest rates dramatically. And this is something that the rest of the world really now has to rebel against, even though in the case of the US dollar being at the center of the world economy, South Africans, specifically white South Africans around Jan Smuts in 1944, are partly to blame because they linked the dollar to gold, and South Africa at the time had about half the world's gold reserves underneath us here in Johannesburg. And those are the sorts of, let's say, durable relationships between our imperial Western powers and the sub-imperial white South African and especially financial powers that I hope more of us become aware of and very critical of.
No, 100%. Professor, thank you for your time. That was a very informative outlook in terms of into the BRICS. I think many of us really needed to understand more as what is happening and what would be the way forward, especially looking at our own economic situation in South Africa and the SADC also. At one point, I believe that it would have been a lighter side for us all to join the BRICS. But anyhow, as things unravel, then we'll be certain and sure to see what is happening. Once again, Professor, thank you for your time and do have a beautiful and wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
That was Professor Patrick Bourne, who is political economist, taking us through the understanding more of the BRICS and the expansion with the new countries coming in and what it has in store for us in the upcoming future. So let's take a break, inshallah, and thereafter we'll be looking at the kidnapping of the 82-year-old Uncle Abu Lunat, who has returned for over a month being kidnapped. And on that, we'll be joined by Chad Thomas, who's a criminal expert, inshallah.